Okay, we're going to read Exodus chapter 14. We're only going to read verses 1 through 12, then we'll come back and break them down. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled. Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariots ready, took his people with him, and he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and the chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them, camping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, in front of Baal-zephon. And as Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way? Bring us out of Egypt. Is this not what the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Okay, so I read through 14. It was a paragraph. Okay, so let's go back to verse 1. I know how quickly we forget.
So up to this point in time, from when they were wandering down to this area, how much time do they think has elapsed since then?
I'm so glad you asked. We're really going to cover this so thoroughly next week, but everything that I've read teaches that they believe, their tradition they passed on is that they crossed the Red Sea on the 17th, which that's going to be so significant. So it's 3 days. I mean, they are booking it. They're afraid. They know Pharaoh's coming, and they think they made this journey. And we'll see, if we had read the whole chapter 14, we're going to see that they make a distinction between morning and daybreak. And so I was like, well, what's that? But they considered for sure the fourth watch of the night, and possibly the third, to be morning. So when it says don't come out of your house until morning, it's quite, because they're going to make a distinction, morning before daybreak. And so the same way they considered evening when the sun began its descent, the same way they do morning before daybreak, which we do the same thing. We say 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. They would do the same thing.
So third and fourth wash.
For sure the fourth, and you know, some say third. It's just like the noon thing where evening started at the descent of the sun. They would consider evening. The same thing with morning. So very interesting. So that gives them a lot more travel time, explains the night, and
That's not a long time period for the Egyptians to really
not at all.
cooking their own meals and such.
Yes, right. And yeah, no, it wouldn't have been. It wasn't long at all.
Especially think that the Israelites are on foot and the Egyptians are on chariots.
Yes, and there's 600,000 men plus women and children. Plus all their livestock, plus all the leaf, plus their bread on their. Of course, they bake the bread by now, but yeah, it's just
Can you imagine what that group would have looked like going through the Philistine land? I mean, it would have been
Yes.
like devastating
Target.
that land, just traveling through it, not letting you really occupying it, just traveling through it
Yes.
would have.
Yeah, huge
been
target.
huge.
Huge target too for
Yes.
their enemies, and yeah. So, yeah, very
But
interesting.
it's probably also intimidating to the others at the same time because it was 600,000.
Yes, yes. And
What would we do if 600,000 people were?
Marching across the.
Yeah.
Well, had that ever been done at this point? I mean, had ever a group that large ever
Migrated somewhere?
migrated? I mean, yeah. I mean,
That's what they were doing,
it's,
migrating.
it's
Yeah, they were.
very. I would imagine unheard of.
yes, I would
Mhm.
think that would be a very interesting sight to see.
I think it's well unheard of now. But
Yes, and like, well, gosh, a week ago they were slaves, and now here they go, leaving with gold and silver, and yeah, it was
Now, is the cloud and the fire still leading them?
yes,
Now, what is that doing to the people who see that
Exactly.
coming?
exactly,
Mhm.
yes, I know, and I mean, what a
The
treasure.
weather forecasters would have it.
I know. I mean, what an amazing thing to have a cloud in the desert. That would have just been so,
Yeah.
yeah. So they left Ethan, and so he says, turn back. So I'm back in Exodus 14:2, I guess technically. Tell the sons of Israel, turn back and camp before Pi-Hahiroth between Migdal and the sea. And I mean, he's so specific. It tells you what's on the other side of the lake, or the lake, the Red Sea, where they're going to be. It tells you what's exactly on the other side, so you know exactly where they were. I will tell you, like, it's very difficult for the map people today to know what you know how bodies of water change and they look differently through the years. Of course, it's been a lot of years, and so they're not really sure, but the Bible gives us those two names, so it's so clear where they were in the land. I'm just not sure what the body of water looked like, but it's big enough to drown 600, this entire Egyptian army. And so they're not wading across an ankle deep, whatever. I don't know. They came up with some of the craziest things to explain away God. But there's enough water in this Red Sea to drown an entire Egyptian army. And it was the biggest, most powerful, current, up-to-date military on the planet at the time. Okay, so he tells them to turn back. So from all appearances, it looks like they're going to go south of the wall and then over, and then all of a sudden God says, no, he's going to take them right to the middle of this Red Sea where there's nowhere to go. And I just love this part in 3. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they're wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Like, oh, those poor pathetic, shepherds don't even know where they're going. And it would look like that because it's defying logic. It would not have been normal to go camp there. It would have been normal to cross, not normal to go to the middle of a sea where there's nowhere to go. Not normal. And so Pharaoh's going to see this, and he's going to take advantage of it. Oh, those poor, Israelites. We've got to go. We're going to go get them. They don't even know where they're going. They look lost. And like Dr. McMahon pointed out, this cloud's leading them. So, I mean, they're not left to their own. I mean, the cloud's leading them. This is a big plan. So sometimes when things defy logic and they don't look like they make any sense at all, sometimes the Lord works that way, and then we're going to see why. Verse 4, thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So he's making himself known. I mean, that's the whole point. He's all throughout the plagues. So they're thinking those poor Israelites are lost in the wilderness, they don't even know where they're going. And they're thinking these poor Egyptians, they're worshiping these worthless, made-up, powerless gods that they've just built and made up in their own head, and they can't even save them. And so God's making it known. Their gods are false, and he is the true sovereign God. And so he will be honored. And Elisa always points out sometimes God uses the most amazing things to make himself known. But it's all about making himself known. I will be honored through Pharaoh and his armies, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so.
Hardening the Pharaoh's heart. But like since day one, like I don't understand, like what did Pharaoh do to get his, like why? I mean, it just doesn't sound like a nice thing to do. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like,
Yeah, well, it's all of, he is God, and he's making himself known, and
so he's using the Pharaoh.
Well, but when we
Yeah.
first talked about that, we talked about the definition of hardening.
Okay.
That
remind me, 'cause I
His heart
forgot.
was pretty much already hardened, and God set his heart. Isn't that what
right,
it
where
was?
it was all, it's to gel or to set like you would do ceramic. So you take your clay and you mold it, and then you set it, and then it doesn't mold anymore. That's the picture that I get with this word harden. It wasn't like, oh, sweet little Pharaoh who loves people, bless his heart. It's more like he hated God. I mean, from day one, it's a battle of they'll serve me, and Moses like, no, we want to go serve our Lord. No, you'll serve. They're my people. You belong to me, and you're going to worship me. And he's just firming that up.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me.
Yes. No, he's not like a sweet little innocent man who so desperately wants to serve the Lord and can't because he's hard in his heart. He hates God, and we've just seen that struggle throughout all of it. I mean, from the very Exodus chapter 1, when God said, "My people are going to multiply and become a great nation," they made their lives so bitter so they wouldn't multiply. And then he said, I'm going to give you this land, and Pharaoh worked so hard to keep them from getting it. It's just a battle. I mean, he hated God. He opposed God from chapter 1.
One has to have financial reasons to keep them.
Yes.
They
Yes.
provide all kinds of things for them.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
workforce
I
and
think they probably built that wall. I mean, I don't
cheap
know, but
workforce.
I was thinking they probably built the wall everyone around. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It was cheap labor, and they were good. I mean, yeah, they were good. So all of this is so that God can be made known, and just compare. And he said very clearly, this is a judgment on their God. So he's demonstrating their fraud of these gods they worshipped, and exalting himself as the true God. Okay, verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So it's just that battle. They want them. They are serving them, serving their needs. I wanted to remind you, I don't know if I put it in your notes, but back in, I think it was I didn't put it in my notes, chapter 12, the night that death passed through. Yeah, so Exodus chapter 12, verse 30. Oh, well, I started 29. Now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no one there, no home where there was not someone dead. Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, "Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks, your herds, as you have said, and go, blessed be also." And the Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We shall all be dead." So, I mean, just remember, this is just a few verses ago, 3 days ago, less than 3 days ago. They're begging Israel to get out, get out, get out, get out. And we can talk about, I mean, like in my notes, it's like, they're still mourning their dead. I mean, it has not been that long, and Egyptians have a long mourning period. They're still mourning their dead, and then they just have this change of heart. Like, what have we done? We let Israel go. No, fair. No, you didn't. God redeemed his people. And again, the bottom line is from serving us. Okay, and then so he made his chariots ready, took his people with him, and he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. I think the Egyptians invented the chariots.
No.
But if they didn't
They
invent
didn't
them,
invent
they
Egyptians.
perfected them. Okay, I knew this one.
I watched a whole special
Yes.
on Nova over
Okay.
where they recreated
Yes.
the Egyptian chariot, and they
Okay.
went and studied the original, how it came from,
Okay.
I think, somewhere around the Canaan area actually. But they took the idea, and when I was first used, it was not as sturdy. And when the Egyptians took it, they made it to where it
They
was a
perfected.
weapon in itself, let alone the people who carried
And
it.
it had
around.
two drivers, from my understanding.
Yes.
Did it have two horses or one horse?
Pretty sure it was just one, but it might have been two.
I know, I couldn't remember either.
remember
But I
which
know
one.
it had two
It
drivers.
had two drivers. You had one usually more in harder driving, and one usually with weapons.
Yes.
Um,
And this would have been state of the art. I mean, this was like,
No, if anyone,
Yeah,
no
tell-
army could defeat the Egyptians when they had chariots. They were undefeated. It was.
I mean, it was just, yes.
They ransacked.
Okay, so they had 600 select chariots. I think everyone had two drivers. And then at least one horse. Maybe two. We don't know. And
They
then,
were so maneuverable too. So, they talk about the terrain sometimes, but even when it goes off bumpy terrain, they were. Whereas up until that point, horseback was only good if you were on the horse, because then what you had anything behind it, they could not maneuver. But the Egyptian chariots were actually very maneuverable. Sorry, I know.
I'm saying, tell us more.
On Nova, I
Because
learned way
the
too
more,
much.
but the more we understand that, the more you realize how great God is. That's what we just, it was just it was huge. It was, I mean, undefeatable. That's just the perfect word. They could not be defeated. Okay, and contrast that with these former they were slaves, less than 3 days ago they were slaves. And they were shepherds, which the Egyptians despised shepherds. So, I mean, they're the lowest of the lowly. They're shepherds. They've got their families and livestock. They're just not soldiers. And then they're coming against, I know, and it's so good when you have that contrast.
Do we have any record of the Egyptian numbers, like what they would have had before the Passover, and then what they would have been? Because even their top quality people, I mean, they're missing
I
the
know,
firstborn,
the
which I would think the
firstborns.
firstborn are probably some of the leaders. and-
Yes, that's a good point.
And then
Yeah.
once they get those, then they're all going to die in the
I
Red
will
Sea.
tell you what was interesting just in reading about this, that the Pharaoh before this Pharaoh, his history is recorded, great big history. There's this Pharaoh, silence. Like there's nothing on this Pharaoh, total silence. And then it took him a long time before you see a great Pharaoh again. It took a long time. This was devastating. So not only to their manpower, but also if you remember the plagues, the locust ate their trees, and I mean, this was a devastated country right now.
Well, if I recall, Egyptians were proud people.
Oh,
And if they didn't want to be in the history books, then it wasn't going to be recorded.
well,
And so my
maybe
question-
that's their line.
I was just thinking that
He
they
didn't want it.
omitted all this stuff because they didn't want it to be known.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's
Well,
a
they
good-
also think that they're superior.
Yeah.
I mean, they have this mindset of, if you are so far below me, I don't have to, deal with you. And now all of a sudden they have to do their own bed chambers and their own
Everything.
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 And it's like, what did we do? We don't even know how to do that, much less.
And we've talked about the pride of it. I mean, he thinks he's God. I mean, he thinks he's God. If he says serve me, you serve him, and he's like, what have we done? We let these people go. Yeah, he thought himself God, and so he's opposing God.
Gee, butting heads with God.
I know, not a good idea. It is not going to end well for anyone who does that. No, he will. I mean, he just has such a way of humbling. I know. He has such. I know, and we see it all the way up through Revelation. They opposed God. No. There is no army big enough. That's what we're going to see here. Yes. Okay, so so we have 600 select chariots plus other chariots, all with 2 drivers each. And then verse 8, and the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel, as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Like, They're just leaving. They're so confident. They've got this cloud. They're free. They've got all the loot from Egypt, and then the Egyptians chase after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. So when it says they overtook them, it doesn't mean it means they're gaining on them, right? Because they're ahead and they're gaining on them. So at this point, they know they're coming and they're gaining on them. See, did I have Psalm 20? Yeah, Psalm chapter 20, verse 7. This is just a good. And see, this is why we gather together and we remind each other of these things. Encourages it and keeps us going. So Psalms chapter 20, verse 7. It says, some boast in chariots and some in horses, but we will boast in the name of the Lord our God. So, yeah. I mean, this is so relevant even today. We tend to, we even hear, like up until this morning, if we just had the right leader, we just had the right this or the right that, and God's way is always dwindling it down and then putting his glory on display. And it's just, he brings us to a place where there's no other explanation except him. Okay, what do I have? Psalm 10. Oh, well, we're in Psalms 106. Okay. I mean, there's so many. If you're in Nehemiah, you know Nehemiah recounts this event. It's rehearsed so many times. Oh wait, I didn't read the rest of. Okay, hold Psalm 106. We got to go back and read the passages in Exodus. We have to read these first. So it's starting in verse 10. So remember, they're walking out boldly. They're feeling so good. And as Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. I know, they're just so confident. They're carrying Egypt's loot. They're escaped. They're free. Egypt's mourning, and then all of a sudden they see an army coming, and that's like.
When they just saw all those plagues destroy.
I know. They all had a firstborn die. You know, Israel did not. I know how quickly we forget. That's honest. Pharaoh they're still mourning their dead, and Pharaoh has forgotten all. Their land's devastated. He forgets the power of God. And then here Israel, they forget. So I want us to look at the, as they recount this. If you get a chance, you can read all of 106. It is so good. Which part did I have us read? 7?
That also points up to just basic human nature. When things go wrong, we want to blame somebody.
Yes. Blame, yes. But just how quickly they they go from being bold to.
Okay. Comment is funny about there are no more graves in Egypt.
I know.
Well, they're acting the same way as the Egyptians. The Egyptians just have the same display of power by God,
Yes.
and bow to His will, and then suddenly they forget, and hey, we can beat them, this time.
Yes.
Yeah, but what happened the last 8 months?
Exactly.
So they're acting no different from, the non-Christians.
Exactly. Yes. Okay, so we'll read 107. I'll start in 106. I'll start in 7. Our fathers in Egypt did not understand thy wonders. They did not remember thine abundant kindness, but rebelled by the sea at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for the sake of his name, that he might make his power known. Thus he rebuked the Red Sea, and it dried up, and he led them through the deep as through the wilderness. And he saved them from the hand of the one who hated them. He redeemed them from the hand of the enemy, and the waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them was left. Then they believed his words and sang his praises. They quickly forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel, but craved intensely in the wilderness and tempted God in the desert. So we'll get to that part. It's coming. But, I mean, it's just they did not remember. And I love so back in verse 7 of 106, it says they did not understand thy wonders. They just did not get it. Like you can see and see and see and know and know and know, but that understanding is so divine. That's divine. The understanding has to come from God and him alone. So they didn't understand, and then they did not remember thine abundant kindness. How quickly we forget. And that explains why he spent chapter 11, 12, 13 telling remember. And it's less than 3 days later, and they've already forgotten. He knows our nature, but with that in mind, notice in verse 7 still, he calls it rebellion. He considers it rebellion. Like, we can say, oh, it's just human nature, and it's so easy for us to do, and it is our tendency. And he says that's rebellion. That's total rebellion. That's the total opposite of what we just read about Joseph, who knew that he knew that he knew. They do not believe it.
It's kind of like when I tell Mary, are you choosing to be disobedient? You know right from wrong. So
Yes. But, it's even here, he's promised to give them this land. He's promised it. Since Genesis chapter 15, are we running out? Okay. He's promised and promised and promised, and this is basically saying, we don't believe you. We don't believe you're able. We're doomed. That's what they're saying, and that's total rebellion. And just like, we'll stop after this. We'll pick it up next week. But anyway, total rebellion. That's putting yourself against God is what that thing is saying. I'm smarter than you, and you can't do this. Oh, I did not want to end on a sad note. I want to end on a happy note. Okay. Oh, well, we'll pick it up here next week. Does anyone have any? Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people, and they said, this is what we have done. What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariots ready. He took his people with him. He took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over them all. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel, and the sons of Israel were going out, as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, in front of Baal-zephon. And as Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, it is because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness. Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. And as for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. And as for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen." And the angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, that there was a cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. And the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. And it came about at the morning watch that the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. And he caused their chariot wheels to swerve. He made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land to the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Okay. I had some maps. I don't think I have any more. But if you don't have one of our maps, you may have one in your Bible. And you can see, like, I don't even know what. You can see where they camped. Okay, anyway, we can see, let's go back to verse 1. They're leaving. So they've had their Passover meal. All the firstborn of Egypt died, and Pharaoh has run them off. So now they're fleeing, and leading them this whole time is the cloud, and it's a pillar of cloud by day, and it's a pillar of fire by night. And we talked last week about how amazing it is, this pillar of fire. Well, the cloud by day, because the sun in the desert would have been terrible, but also we pointed out that the fire by night, it would have kept them warm in the desert at night, but also would have kept predators and animals away. The fire would have scared them. They didn't have street lights, so it would have provided light for them. And they're traveling day and night to get to this point. And we talked last week. There were two easy. Well, there's choice number one, which would have been the easiest route. They would have just left Goshen and just right across. Oh, you found one. Okay, they would have left and just gone right. Yeah, right there. It would have been so easy just to go right over. Well traveled, so smoother, more provisions, food and water. But God leading them through this cloud didn't take them that way. And then from what I read and what I understand, that Egypt had built a wall to protect themselves against the Hittites. And so they would have had to go all the way down, and then at the bottom of the wall, or south of the wall, there was a path, a clear path. And that's where they were headed when the Lord turned them back and said he's not taking them that way, which would have been the obvious plan B. Instead, he takes them where they're like right in the middle of the sea, where there's nowhere to go. There's no clear path. It's just water. So that's where they are. And he on purpose turns them back. So in Pharaoh's mind, we can see here, Pharaoh sees them. Let's see.
Can Pharaoh see the cloud and the fire?
I think yes. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't say he could. I think yes. I think he didn't know what it was.
Part of the time when I read this, I think he can't, and then I think, well, yes, he can.
I mean, I think he saw it, but I think it was more like a natural, like weird to have clouds in the desert. But I think he could see it, but I don't think he knew.
What?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
I don't know. It just doesn't say, so we don't know. But he can obviously tell where they are, and the whole point. And let's see if he says it. So God's going to harden his heart, and Cindy had asked about that last week, and we talked about the hardening, meaning it's like a pottery term to set or to gel, to firm up what's already there. But then I thought about it this week too. Romans chapter 1, beginning in 18, I think it's 18 through 25, it talks about God giving them over. That's another picture. Just they want it so badly, and they don't care what's right or wrong. They want it so badly. Finally, God just gives them over. And that's the other idea. So firming up what's already there, or just giving them over to what their heart desires. And so that's what he's done to Pharaoh. He's hardened his heart, and he's chasing after it. But God tells us why. He makes it so clear, and it's all to make his glory known. And we're going to see in a minute that it really, really worked. So he's going to make his glory known. All of Egypt, they're worshiping these fake gods. They're going to know that he is the Lord. So that's the plan. Even though it looks like this isn't really logical, it just didn't look like the logical way to go. Especially knowing they're going to Israel, which is, if you can see Gaza, and it's that way. And he's taking them another way. So Pharaoh has a change of heart. He's like, why? Verse 5, what is this that we have done? We've let Israel go from serving us. So they were great workers, and he doesn't know what he did because they ran him off. I was like, what were we thinking? It could not have been long. Like, they're still mourning their death, the death of their firstborn. I mean, there's still great grieving going on in Egypt. And so I guess they called a meeting and said, I don't know, what were we thinking? And then we talked last week about the 600 select chariots plus other chariots. Each chariot would have had 2 drivers, and these were amazing chariots that they could really navigate the land. They were amazing chariots, these big horses. The mightiest army on earth at this time. Just their weapon, everything was superior. The best of the best. It was superior to anything else that existed. Then the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. And then I love verse 8 where it says Israel was going out boldly. Like they're so confident. They've got the Lord. They're following this cloud. And they're very plus all the plunder of Egypt. So they're going out boldly. And then all of a sudden, the Egyptians were chasing after them. And so it tells where they were. They're at this Hiroth, opposite Baal Zephron. So it's very clear on the map where they were. It looks different than my map, but it's hard to know what the waters looked like in that day because waters change course. But we know that there's going to be enough water in this Red Sea where they crossed that's going to drown these 600 chariots, which would mean, 1,200 men plus horses plus the other chariots. So, I mean, we're talking huge, huge army. And then we've got Israel. They've been slaves for 430 years. They're not trained soldiers. And they certainly don't have this kind of weaponry or anything that could defend themselves against this kind of weaponry. They've got their women, their children, their livestock, the plunder. And then they realized that this huge Egyptian army that I'm sure you could hear for miles away were approaching, gaining on them is the word, and they became very frightened, as anybody would. That would be scary. So they became frightened, but then and it says in verse 10, they cried out to the Lord, which is great. That's where we start. That was a good start, crying out to the Lord. But then it turns.
We had Psalms 27.
Yeah, well, we read it last week. It's the one where some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord. Yeah.
You might have said this last week, but this is interesting. The average depth of the Red Sea is 1,600 feet.
Oh my goodness.
That's the average.
Average. That is so
you
fascinating.
can imagine how big the wall was.
Wow. That's huge. I had no idea. Wow. So.
Now, it does say now there's extensive shallow
Right.
shells, but it doesn't say how deep they are. But they have coral life and stuff on it. But
Yeah, I mean,
I always wondered how deep it was.
well, I mean, it's a huge body of water. It's a huge body of water, and you can see where it has two little, like it splits. I mean, it's a huge body of water. I mean, the critics would say it was ankle deep at the time they passed through, but the critics would be wrong because ankle deep water doesn't drown an army of this size.
And
So
that's not dry ground.
exactly, no. Okay, so
Well, I like the fact that they cried out for God for 400 years. It's like, take us out, take us out, take us out. And then they see, God's taking them out, and then it's like, why didn't you leave us there? Let us die.
That blows me away when they cross the ocean on dry ground and see walls of water on each side. Why they, why they didn't think if he's capable of that, he can take care of us.
well, at this point, they haven't seen the water split, but they've seen 10 plagues, like 10 amazing plagues where they were certainly protected while Egypt was exposed to these judgments.
And they were told it was coming.
I know.
It's like, this is going to happen. And it's like, it wasn't like, oh, and I woke up and there was frogs. It's like, it's going to be frogs.
Right.
And then it
That's just
happened.
like today, we're told what's
I know.
coming.
And some of us ain't.
Well, that's what I love about this. We can really see our natural tendencies. I think it just shows God knows like how we are, like our natural tendencies.
We're born pessimists.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's so natural to walk by sight, and by that, I just mean we just go by our circumstances, what we see, what we know, based on just like natural. That's that's natural. Walking by faith, that requires an amazing intervention by an amazing God. It's so not normal.
That requires a lot of faith, doesn't it?
It
To walk
does.
by faith.
It does. It's just because if we go on autopilot, we're gonna just go by our circumstances, which is what they're doing here. Let's look at what they said to Moses, and this just so doesn't match the first 6 chapters of Exodus. Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us this way, bringing us out of Egypt? And like Nalise said, if you read the first 6 chapters of Exodus, which we did, they were crying to be delivered. They knew God was going to deliver them. And I don't know, they just see this big army and they're very afraid. And this is all, not only is this reflective of our human nature, this is like the beginning of the next 40 years, the way they're going to treat Moses. This is just,
It's an example of emotions run amok. Because if we let our emotions rule us, we can't see what God can do.
right. And it, like you say, it's just trusting in what we see and know, like here, and not trusting the promises of God. And that's faith. And we're growing in it, hopefully, every day, where we're learning to trust when our circumstances and God's word, like, are opposite, when they don't match. It's learning to trust God's promises and over our circumstances. And that's the other thing, like with Israel, when they go into the promised land, it's going to be battle. They're going to have to physically fight. In the book of Joshua, it's just, they're fighting. But the way they train for that, they're going to spend 40 years learning to trust God for everything. Like, they're not practicing and preparing for that by having target practice. It's learning to trust God, Him making promises and then keeping them, which we've already seen that begin. So they accused Moses of bringing them out against their will, accusing him of bringing them out to let him die. And then, is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? They did. Okay. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptian than to die in the wilderness. We looked at Psalm 106. I think it's worth looking at again. 106, Psalm 106, verse 7. There are several Old Testament, especially in the Psalms, but they just rehearse this history. This is huge in the life of Israel and their history, and this is one of those chapters that just rehearses the whole thing. Starting in verse 7. Our fathers in Egypt did not understand thy wonders. They did not remember thine abundant kindnesses, but rebelled by the sea at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for the sake of his name, that he might make his power known. Thus he rebuked the Red Sea and dried it up, and led them through the deeps as through the wilderness. So he saved them from the hand of the one who hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of their enemy. And the waters covered their adversaries, not one of them was left. Then they believed his words, and they sang his praise. But when they do this, so we're at this point, they didn't understand his wonders, and they didn't remember his abundant kindness, and they rebelled. So God considers this act of saying this to Moses as total rebellion. He sees it as total rebellion. And it's, I don't know if you remember, starting in chapters 10, I think 11, 12, and 13, he says, remember. He sets aside these ordinances, the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to help them remember. They're to serve as reminders. Remember, he says over, remember. I think 38 verses are dedicated to remembering this event. And we're a few days out, and they did not remember. Again, I know. And obviously Pharaoh didn't either. Like how quickly we forget. And so that's why it's important that we gather together and remind each other, remind ourselves, and just rehearse over and over the goodness of God, and just help remind ourselves and each other of his goodness. But they didn't do that. They've already forgotten his abundant kindness, and they rebelled. And basically what they were saying is, I know you said you were going to bring us into the land, to our own land, into the promised land, but we don't think you can. We think we're going to die in the wilderness, and we don't think you're able. Like, casting doubt on his covenant keeping. He makes a promise and he keeps it, and they're casting doubt on that. They're not believing that his word is true. And like we talked about last week, it's total opposite of Joseph, who on his deathbed said, I know you're going to leave, and when you do, you take my bones. It's just so confident that he was going to do what he said. Abraham and Isaac, when he goes to offer Isaac, God had already promised that it was through the seed of Isaac that the promise would be reckoned. And so Isaac wasn't married, he had no children, and God tells Abraham to go sacrifice your son, and Abraham does, because he's so confident that God will keep his word. If God said it's through the seed of Isaac, it's going to be through the seed of Isaac. I don't know how he's going to do it, I just know he will. So he doesn't even hesitate, because he believed so much in the promises of God. And so here we're seeing the polar opposite. They were looking at their circumstances, and they were basically saying God's not able, and he considered it rebellion. Okay. And that's where we left off last week. Okay. So let's look at verse 13. But Moses said to the people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. Then the Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. And I understand in the original language that's pretty harsh when he says you keep silent. It's kind of like you shut your mouth. It's a very harsh. You keep quiet, and the Lord's going to do the work. And I mean, if there's nothing else, I want you to see in this chapter the helplessness of Moses, the helplessness of Israel to deliver themselves. I mean, this is so beyond them. This is so much bigger than them, which is why God took them to the middle of the sea rather than, crossing above the sea. They go through it. He brings it to this point. So there's absolutely no doubt that God is divinely delivering them. Okay.
So when he says be quiet, is he saying don't say a word, absolute silence, or is he saying don't grumble? What is he really saying there?
The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. I mean, I took it, the grumbling and the doubting, just like an awe as he delivers. I don't know.
I always think,
It's
stop worrying about it. God's going to take care of it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a pretty harsh, like shut your mouth or keep.
Isn't there another passage of scripture that is very similar to that somewhere?
And I think he
There's another
says
one,
it
but
again.
Where is that at?
I can't remember.
I can't remember. It says it almost
wanna
the same words.
I want to
but
say it's in
see.
Joshua.
something about God fighting the battle. You be still.
Yeah, you be still. You need,
Something.
yeah. And then, but what's weird is he says here to be still, like, do not fear, stand by and see. And then in a minute he's going to say, go forth. But I think the whole idea here is that there's nothing we can do to deliver ourselves. I mean, I think this would be, but I don't know about the keeping side. There is one, I just can't think of it off the top of my head because I looked it up.
You know, I see a parallel of them in Egypt, the Israelites in Egypt, to the people in the United States who have just kind of, well, there's nothing we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And they've just nothing we could do till everything's just going to pot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I see this parallel all the time.
Well, yeah, and what's so like they're just like there's some. Did you find that cross reference? Where is it?
Second Chronicles
Oh.
20:17.
Is that the one we looked at
No,
last?
it says you have to fight this battle, take up your position, stand firm, seal deliverance. The Lord will give you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Go out to face them tomorrow, and the Lord will be with you.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah. That's
Sounds
yeah.
kinda
Exactly.
similar.
Yeah. And that seems to be a pattern. He doesn't say, "I need your help. Get out your swords." It's just you be still. You be silent.
You watch.
And watch
You don't
with
have to fight
awe.
You don't
It's-
have to
my
fight.
Bible always uses the word still instead of silent.
yes.
So that is not necessarily quiet as much as inactive.
Okay, that's good. Although the original language from what I read was pretty harsh. Like, shut your mouth. But I think it had to do more with the way they were talking to Moses. And
Well,
the
it would have been
grumbling.
frantic. So some of them would have
Yes.
been trying, okay, can we
Yes.
do this, can we do that? So everybody's
Right.
trying to, okay, some of
Like
us are going to do this, and then the name blaming, you know.
Yes.
Is it your fault? Is it your fault? You know, and suddenly they're just pointing fingers everywhere. This chaos, you know, instead of organized, trying to figure out what are we going to do. Everybody's busy doing their own thing.
Yes, that's good. And like a calming. Just you just be still and let me work.
I just think about us as women.
I
I get all worked up and talk a lot when there's a problem, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably why God
Nervous
says,
energy.
"Keep silent."
But I love how he says, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. So they were so helpless to deliver themselves. Otherwise, they would have done it. And then, so they're following the Lord. They're following this cloud is leading them. And, it looks like they've gone the totally wrong way. Pharaoh gets emboldened because it looks like they're so turned around and lost in this wilderness. Why didn't they go, south of the wall? And so he thinks they're confused. But yet, I just, like in my own thing, I was just thinking when God, like, I don't know what the right word would be, but like crisis, hardships, sometimes God leads us there to display his glory. Like, it wasn't like they were following their own way. God purposefully led them here. And I think so many times we've seen this pattern, even in Genesis. He brings you to Sarah and Abraham. They were beyond childbearing years. So even during her childbearing years, she was barren. They could not have. He brings you to the point where you are so helpless. It's like Sarah was so helpless to bring forth a son. There was nothing she could do. And then it's the same way here. He brings to the point so there's no mistaking. He doesn't want us to mistake and think, well, we had a part in that, or we, he couldn't have done it without us, or, we played a role. It's always like there's no options. If God doesn't deliver us, then we can't be delivered. It's so dependent on him. Okay. And then I really studied this out last week, and so I hope it's not really disconjointed this week, but we'll see. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward." So, he says stand and be in awe, and then he says go forward. So it's not that you, curl up in a ball, but you just understand he's the deliverer, and, you go forward and let him deliver. And then it was interesting that he says, "Why are you crying out to me?" There's no prayer, there's no words recorded of Moses. So, I don't know if he said something out loud and they didn't record it, or if it's just all in his head and God knew what he was thinking. If he was silently praying to God, I don't know. He tells the sons of Israel to go forward. "And as for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land." Which, even in this drought, when we have ponds or creeks that dry up, the bed is still very, very muddy. You have to be very careful. And this within, instantly.
It's almost like quicksand.
Yes, that's what I had read. It would
This
have
little
turned.
boy's friends got stuck at the lake because it's dry, but it's
And it looks dry on the surface,
looks
and
dry.
then.
but it's like quicksand underneath.
And that's after a long time of no rain. This is instantly, which again, we're back to the sovereignty of God. He's over nature. He tells water what to do, water. He's not bound by the laws of nature. He tells nature what to do. So, just his sovereignty. And then here's the part I wanted to look at last week because we were talking about, "And as for you, lift up your staff." This is a shepherd's staff. And I wanted to share this part with you because I thought it was so interesting. The way he's going to carry this shepherding theme all the way to the book of Revelation. The same way you missed out on you inspired the lamb. So we did a lamb thing last
Julian
week.
was sick last week.
I
I'm
know,
sorry, I hated
I
that I missed
know.
it. I'm so upset.
Well, so anyway, we did the lamb thing last week all the way through Revelation. It carries through. And then this week I wanted us to look at how the shepherding is going to carry all the way through. And I love, like when we were studying Jacob as a shepherd, just the tenderness that a shepherd would have for his flock. Even when they weren't his, when he was doing it for his, very deceitful Uncle Laban. He was so, like, the care that a shepherd would give for his flock. And I just want you to see how this tenderness towards his people, and it's carried out all the way to the book of Revelation. It's so neat. Of course, we all know the 23rd Psalm, Lord's my shepherd. There were a couple of others I wanted us to look at together. So Psalm 77. Psalm chapter 77, verse 20. And I love that 77th Psalm. He's in such despair, and the way he encourages himself as he starts remembering the Exodus and what God did for his people. And then he ends it with verse 20. Thou didst lead thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So just the tenderness of leading them. One of my favorite sermons on Psalm 23, we were visiting a church in Texas, and it was a cowboy preaching on a shepherd, and he compared the difference between how a cowboy would herd cattle versus a flock and a shepherd.
Have you ever read the book, A Shepherd's Look at Psalms 23?
I have.
About-
Is it good?
Very good book.
Okay,
One of my favorites.
Okay, I need to put that on my
And
to-do
it's about
list.
a shepherd.
Yes.
And he talks all about the 23rd Psalm and thou
Yeah.
anoint my head with oil and all those things that we read that we're like, what does that mean? And how it relates, like, really good.
We did Kay Arthur's on the Lord my shepherd. It is just so, but I do need to I'll put that on my to-do list.
It's a really
Yes.
good one.
It's just such a
I think it's called
shepherd's look
A
at.
Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. And that may not be verbatim what it is, but just
Yeah.
it was a popular a long time ago, I think, but I read it a couple years ago and just
It's good.
wow. I mean,
Okay.
it's good.
Okay, and then in 78, I'm starting in verse 52. So Psalm 78, right where we are. But he led forth his own people. Oh, this whole thing is good. I know. Okay. Okay, but put that on your to-do list. Read Psalm 78. But he led forth his own people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock, and he led them safely so that they did not fear, but the sea engulfed their enemies. I mean, it goes through the whole plagues and everything. He just talks, oh my goodness, yes. And he smote the firstborn in Egypt. And then he led forth his people like sheep. And the one thing I remember most about our study of the shepherd is how dumb sheep are. I just thought that was so appropriate.
Brainless.
Yes. And then, did I put John 21 in there?
Yeah, but Acts 20.
Okay, we're going to look at John 21 first. I just loved this one. I looked up so many, and then, the debate. Where did I put it? John chapter 21. John chapter 21, verse 15. And this is after Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And then this is after the resurrection. And Jesus is going back to Peter. And he says, starting verse 15. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my lambs. And he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, shepherd my sheep. And he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." So it's just such a tender way that he refers. And then the Acts one, we'll look at it next. Acts chapter 20. Starting in verse 26. And this is when Paul is leaving the church of Ephesus, and he's been there 3 years, and he's saying goodbye. "Therefore I testify to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all men, for I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole purpose of God. Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves men will arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after themselves. Therefore be on the alert, remembering that night and day for a period of 3 years I did not cease to admonish each one of you with tears." And so here again, we've looked at the purchasing. So he's purchased the church with his own blood. But I think he says 3 times in here, guard the flock, shepherd the church, and even to the point of carrying this analogy all the way out, even talking about false teachers and false prophets, referring to them as wolves, and here savage wolves. And so just this shepherding. And then I don't even think I put Revelation in here. I didn't write it in my notes, but it's Revelation chapter 7. I hope that's the right one because I didn't write it down. Yes, 7:17. Which we looked at the Lamb last week. So now we see, "For the Lamb in the center of the throne shall be their shepherd, and shall guide them to springs of the water of life, and God shall wipe away every tear from their eyes." So again, the Lamb is the shepherd, and we still see this picture all the way to Revelation, to the end, and so I wanted us to have that image because there's such a contrast the way he treats his people, and then we're going to see how he treats Egypt and the enemies.
God calls himself the Lamb here, and he calls us the flock. So he's one of us.
Yes, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
I didn't think about
I just
that.
thought about that.
Yes, he is the slain lamb, and then he is.
I think
Yes.
that's referred to as the shepherd. So I think that's the difference between his
Yes.
deity and then his humanity.
humanity.
Yeah, he can be
He is
both at the
both.
same time.
Yeah.
That is so good. I had not
Awesome
even thought.
point, y'all.
I
That was
know.
really awesome.
That is really good. It is. Which, just keep that in mind when we get to the priesthood, because we're going to need that same picture where you, yeah,
Like
They're-
he is the high priest.
the high priest, and just the way the priests are their brothers. I mean, they're all. Okay. Okay, I just wanted to. Okay, now we're gonna start. Okay, we're gonna pick it up. And there's just so many things to say. So they're gonna go through on dry land, and then verse 17. So back in Exodus chapter 14, verse 17. "And as for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen." And so, he makes it very clear why this is happening. He said it over and over and over and over. One wants us to remember, two, he wants to be honored. And so even in his, like I noticed when I taught it last time, I kept putting in my notes, God is not honored when we change his character at all. That does not bring glory to him at all. And so we see that even in the judgments, even with God as judge, we've seen God as shepherd, he's also God as judge, and even in his judgments, he's glorified. And so we're going to see that here. And then Elise always points out he can use anything to bring glory to himself. Even, those who oppose him, it brings glory to him. And then verse 19. And the angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. And there was a cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus one did not come near the other all night. So it's like this, and I just keep going back to the shepherding analogy, just the tenderness and the protection, the guarding of the flock, the protecting the flock. So then he goes and stands behind Israel, between Israel and their enemy, separates them. And then it's darkness to Egypt. It does not give them light. It's the same as when we looked at, darkness over Egypt, light in Goshen. And now Israel will have light. And just that protection. Okay. So it came between, okay, we did that one. So one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. And the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right and on their left. And I love how he gives such detail of this picture. So the wind blows it back. So it would come from that direction, splits it, dries it, and it would have just been a wall of water on either side.
Why did you say earlier, you were saying they had to go through it?
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't they go on top of it? This is probably something I should know, but
No, I haven't.
why
Well,
didn't they walk on the water?
well, we're gonna. I think it has.
Is there a reason?
Yes, I think there's a. Yeah, I think there's a very good reason. I mean, they could have, absolutely, as we know.
I'm
from the
just
New
wondering if
Testament.
that's
Yeah.
something I missed. and I
No,
should
no,
know.
we haven't gotten there
Okay.
yet. And so it doesn't look like we're going to get there today. But we are going to cover
I
it
wanna
very
know.
thoroughly. Well, hey, it's in
I don't wanna spoil
1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1. It talks about the
Alright.
baptism, pass through the baptismal
Okay.
waters of the Red Sea. We're going to see.
Okay.
It's
So
good.
symbolic.
It's very, very great picture. 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 and 2. It's in the end of your notes today, so it'll be there, but we'll look at it.
Something you just said about that he gives light and then the enemy has only darkness. Well, as his children, as his kids, they can see him. But the enemy, or those that don't believe in him, they're all in darkness. I mean, and that's a picture of eternity too.
Yes. A spiritual blind, that darkness theme, it's cast into everlasting darkness. It's a separation from God. Yeah, we saw with the dark, the plague of darkness that came over Egypt, one of the plagues.
Because you've got an unbeliever and a believer who are seeing the exact same thing, and one sees it and one doesn't.
Well, I was thinking too about when Paul was on the road to Damascus, and when he's describing his testimony in the end of Acts, he says he heard God speak to him, Paul, Paul, why are you persecuting me? But he said those around him just heard thunder. So, in the hearing thing, that's all a spiritual, which he talks about it in John chapter 18, verse 36. He talks about those who are in him have ears to hear. Those who have ears to hear, let him hear. And those who aren't his, it's just thunder. And I'm wondering if it's the same thing with it was just darkness to them, and yet it was.
Or it could be something to be feared, if you're on the wrong side, to where it's something of comfort.
Yes,
If you're on the
that's
other side,
good.
you want
Yes,
to move away from it, or do you draw close to it?
that's a good.
Depending on your side of what is it to you.
Yes, and that's such a good picture too. Like if you're in him,
Mhm.
There's so much. He is your shepherd, and there's so much comfort in that. If you've rejected him, then he is your judge, and there's so much fear in that.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just, yeah, just
But he also knew what Paul was gonna do, but Paul wouldn't have been able to hear him.
yes, right, exactly. Like we
Always
can't
like
hear.
it beckons to us, not just everybody.
I put it in words of like understanding and that insight. If you're not in him, you can read this. The Pharisees proved that. You can read this, you can memorize it, you can parrot it, you can quote it, but you cannot understand it unless the Holy Spirit is just making it alive and making it so clear. You see that played out in Romans chapter 1 again, verses 18 through 25. It's just this constant. I mean, what Dr. McMahon pointed out last week, it's the same thing. You pointed out this morning, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter what book you're reading, it's the same story. It's all about Jesus, and that never changes. Okay. Okay, where were we? Okay, verse 20. So I'll pick up in Exodus 14:21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. Oh, we did read that. So verse 23. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and they're feeling a little confident right now. And all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. And it came about at the morning watch that the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. And he caused their chariot wheels to swerve. He made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." So, this army going into confusion. Israel is so hands off in this. They are such spectators in this deliverance. They're just, they've got the army coming this way. They've got a sea this way. The sea opens up. They're just walking. They're just going. They are, and they're being led. Yes.
This reminds me of the story in Deborah, when I've been saying Deborah.
Yes.
The same thing happened with the armies. I'm not going to
Oh,
tell
yes.
the whole story like I just did a minute ago.
Okay.
But I'll just say a little snippet is that they, when Barak and all them, they were
Yes.
going up against all those chariots of iron and stuff, and they
Yes.
were like little people, whatever, just like the Israelites. And they, God threw it all into confusion
Yes.
to
It's
where,
what
it
he does.
wasn't about
Yes.
the chariots of iron or whatnot, but,
Yeah.
the battle was his and not.
Yes, always, yes. Isn't that a good picture though? And they're so hands off and they're just total spectators in either instance, and it looks so helpless and so hopeless and like there's no way out. And then God just divinely intervenes. It's just amazing.
In comparison to a cow, cows go one right behind the other, and they'll follow you anywhere. The sheep are gonna here and there.
They stray.
I think that's why we get scatterbrained. That's why.
Well, the other thing I learned is that a cow herder will go from behind and herd him this way, but a shepherd leads, and so he's not asking us to go or step anywhere he hasn't gone first. And just like this, he's prepared the way. The ground is now dry. They're going to walk over, and and then this army, the army's still pursuing them, and they cross over and they're safe. Army's still pursuing it, and then all of a sudden the army just goes into. I just want you to see Israel and have nothing to do with this. This is just so divine. God just takes care of it.
At that point on herding cattle, there's always a leader in the cow.
Okay.
That lead cow or what animal, whatever it is, has to trust what's happening behind.
Okay. Well, how interesting.
For example, if you're moving a bunch of steers or cows, we used to have a cow we called Granny. She was an older cow, but she was very smart and respected by the rest of the. I don't know how she did it, but she was always respected by every member of the herd. She would go in front, and everything would follow her, no matter where she went.
Really? Isn't that interesting?
She also babysit all the calves.
Have you ever heard the saying, the herd effect, where You get
Yes.
lost, you don't know where you're at, you just
You
follow
follow
a
the
bunch of
crowd.
people that don't know where they're
That's
going.
I have a lot to learn about animals.
I-
Haven't lived on a farm or
So you came to the right
I don't even own
place.
a dog. I have a lot to learn.
But
Yes.
even
I'm
though
like,
they're
wow, I
being
didn't know
heeded, they
But
are
still.
following.
Oh,
And the point I didn't make was, we trust that lead cow to lead us to the right spot,
Mhm. Yes.
just like
Yeah.
following over here.
Mhm.
Well, I like the fact that God tells Moses, lift up your
Yes.
staff and just trust in me.
Yes.
He's like, okay, God, never seen the water open or don't know what's going to happen, but he does it anyway, and God comes through for him. And then you have the Egyptians who have already seen people die and frogs and
I
flies and
know.
everything else. They're going, oh, the water's party. Just go right on through.
I know.
I am.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
think they know better,
They don't
like,
even
okay.
hesitate. They feel so confident in their pursuit.
I mean, if
That's
the
exactly what I
Israelites
thought,
went
like,
through, surely we
Yeah.
can.
I know,
we
with that big
are.
huge wall of water on each side didn't mean a thing to them. I mean,
Right.
they didn't even,
Right.
they weren't even
They didn't consider
mesmerized
it.
by it.
Yeah,
Well, it's
but
their ego.
exactly. And we see it with King Saul too. You get so obsessed with hanging on. I mean, I was thinking about like so obsessed with pursuing this or hanging on to this that you lose sight of reality. Like
Well, and God had done that
like
to
it's an
them, too.
insane obsession. Yeah. Right. Exactly. God gave them over. So
Now,
it was.
God give them a chance of salvation in a way by, he took off their chariot wheels, he caused them to drive heavily so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the faces of Israel. Is that like their chance to be saved? Because he doesn't just drive them out there and then just dump all the water on them. He gives them this demonstration first.
I
What
don't
is that?
I kind of think it's more a testimony
Mhm.
to the nation of Israel what he can do.
Okay.
And they get confused and they make this great confession. What do they say? Where's their confession? We have to turn back.
It's in 25.
Thank you. I couldn't find it. Yeah. For the Lord is fighting for it. He says, let us flee from. I mean, can you imagine? There's mighty, mighty, mighty army with all these chariots and all these horsemen and all this huge army and all the weaponry. And they're chasing little shepherds with their families and their flocks.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden they realize and they're like, let us flee from Israel.
It's kind of like he tells Lot, don't look back. Hey,
Yes.
guys,
Uh-huh.
get out of
Yeah.
Get out of Dodge.
Get out of- yes. Then they recognize it and they make that great confession. And it's just interesting because they've been worshiping these fake gods all along. Just, fake gods. And then the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptian. It's like this great confession. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't say why.
I think they came off because that way they could get out of the Red Sea.
There you go.
It's
Right,
the
when they
truth.
turned to
They
flee.
turned to flee. They weren't able to
They
get
can't.
out.
No, there's
I
no
mean,
escaping the judgment.
Yeah.
There's
I
no
think it was
escaping the
preventing them
judgment.
from fleeing.
Did I put Hebrews 11? I think it's 29. Hebrews 11, 29. So Hebrews 11:29. This was our by faith passage, the hall of faith. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. So they go from rebellion and grumbling to this act of faith. And I mean, it's an act in faith because the circumstances, like there was nothing in their circumstances that would say, all they had was the promise of God, go through, and you'll arrive safely on it, the promise that he had given. That's all they had, was the promise of God. That's it. That's what they're hoping for, that the promise is true, that God's going to keep his word, and that they're going to pass through safely. And they won't be the ones drowned. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting to go from the rebellion to the recorded as an act of faith. At that moment, it's not going to take them long to rebel again, but at least for that moment, they acted in faith. They trusted God, they trusted his promise, and went. Okay, so, and now we have the entire army drowned. So the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand. Okay, so I'm back in Exodus 14:26. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak. So I don't know if you caught that. There was the morning watch.
So is that the morning watch on the 18th? Like, does the crossing the Red Sea start the 17th?
I mean, we're going to cover this so thoroughly. I thought we would do today, but it looks like it's going to be next week. I'll show you what they teach traditionally. They teach that they pass through safely on the 17th. We don't really know for sure because the Bible does not give us dates, but I will show you why it says that. And we know they're traveling day and night, so they left on, they slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th, had dinner the 15th, and then they flee. And Karen had pointed out that they weren't allowed to leave until morning, but what we learned here, where did it say morning watch?
The third or the fourth watch?
Yeah, it
Is it
did.
morning?
Yes.
Oh, where did it say that?
Yeah, where did we see that in here?
Verse 27.
Yeah, 27 is daybreak, so that's when the sun is actually coming up. But they've referenced morning. Something happened in the morning. Anyway, what I learned was that, and it's just like our timing. If we say 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, it's still dark. So morning, the third, if you have your Jewish calendars, the third watch and the fourth. I know for sure the fourth watch, which was 3 a.m. to sunrise, was considered morning, and possibly the third watch, which is midnight to 3. So the same way evening is when the sun begins to when the sun begins to make its descent, it's considered evening. So afternoon when it's straight up, and what makes its descent, it's evening. And then with morning, I mean, it's no different than our clock and our terminology. We'd say 1 or 2 in the morning. So it didn't mean the sun was up yet. So now, but at daybreak, that's when we're starting to see the sun peek up.
And it says in verse 21 that all night
Yes.
he
See.
drove back to sea.
Yes.
So I wonder if they started walking before it was completely.
I mean,
You know,
you
like
would
he was still
almost have to.
continuously-
You would almost have to, but we know they were traveling by night.
Right.
And we know when the sun was coming up that morning, returned to its normal state at daybreak, which would have been about 6 a.m. So yeah, they've been crossing all night.
So the wind usually blew from north to south, right? I think I read that.
Okay.
That was Norm. And he brought it the east wind, which
Mhm.
was not what blew all the time. Did they walk with the wind behind them? Or,
It would have been in their face, actually.
or
It would have been east wind.
yeah, I was trying to figure out what direction
Mhm.
that was.
It would have been in their face, actually.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't have been able to leave. You think it would clear on the east side first, and then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
How far across was that?
We don't know. The bodies of water have changed so much, they don't know.
But they would have crossed in one night.
Yes, they crossed in one night. So
And that
I'm
just
thinking,
stays by itself right there.
I know. So, I mean, to your point, God's so sovereign.
Yeah.
Like, that just is one more aspect to his sovereignty. Like, if it was an east wind and it started on the west, we don't know how. We just know he created it, he can tell it what to do. And it actually obeys. That's what's amazing. Nature obeys. So, yeah, any other thoughts or questions on it? Because I'm thinking, like, a lot of times when we see it pictured, the path is narrow, but you've got 600,000 men plus women and children plus the livestock. I'm thinking it had to have been a wide, really wide, that they could all go over. I mean, can we just agree? God had to so divinely intervene in their deliverance.
Well, they probably made good time, because have you ever been running late and said, Lord, please help me
Yes.
get there?
Well, that's
And
what's
there's not a possible way you could get there in that time, but you get there.
yes. Yes.
I mean, really, it's happened to me a lot.
What blows my mind is what's to come. I mean, you go through this horrific miracle and then you forget
Well, I mean,
Well, it's like, why?
like just the miracle of Pharaoh saying, "Okay, all of our firstborn are dead. Get out of here, and then take whatever you need for your trip." You know, they were plundering, like that kind of freedom to go, like they were slaves, and then all of a sudden, one declaration, and they're free men. Like they're free. They're so free. They're plundering the Egyptians. I mean, just that by itself, and they'd been in such an oppressive state from chapter 1 to chapter 6. It was so oppressive, and then all of a sudden they're free. I mean, that is a miracle. I mean, I don't know if it's even related, but I keep thinking of the verse, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. It's all about trusting his promises. Because if faith were based on seeing, these people would be spiritual giants. This just proves it has nothing to do with seeing. It has everything to do with hearing the word and believing it. Hearing it and believing it, and that's
Well, I keep thinking, you know, the Egyptians just went through what?
I know.
And none of the Israelites were touched.
Uh-huh.
What, you know, what in the world were they thinking? Well, they just killed everybody. Let's go chase them and get them back. It's like, seriously?
And like they were going to go serve the Lord, and they're like, no, they're going to come back and serve us.
But that just shows God and their hearts
Yeah,
hardened.
they were so blinded and hardened, and
They were his instruments.
they were so obsessed with pursuing this and bringing them back. Yeah, it's
Like
just,
Don's always telling us, if it doesn't make sense, it must be spiritual.
I know. If it's not logical, it's got to be spiritual, because there's no one. And now I do think of Saul and that just insane obsession with, you know, I don't know, just that clinging and hanging on and not letting something go as everything crumbles around you. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so it's daybreak. The Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And just notice, just please don't ever lose sight. Who's the hero? It's not Moses, it's the Lord. Who is the deliverer? The Lord, the Lord, the Lord. He delivered them, he delivers us. He's the deliverer. And he doesn't need help at all. And when it's his purpose to deliver a people, they're going to be so delivered. Like, there's no stopping it.
And the timing again, when morning appeared, so when the sun rose up, you know, like Christ rose from the grave, he conquered death, he conquered darkness.
Yes. We're going to, that's going to be our lesson.
Yeah.
And so, but it looks like it's going to have to wait until next week. Yes, we're going to look at all these. It is so good. So we're just doing the verse by verse today, and next week we'll pull in all the New Testament and look at it in the New Testament. So verse 28, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them, not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And he says it twice, which he doesn't. If he repeats something, it's significant. And I love the contrast. He says, Pharaoh's entire army, not even one remained, but the sons of Israel walked on dry land. Just the contrast.
You see that too in other stories in the Bible,
Yes.
in other battles. Not one, I can think of other
One
ones, not one person survived, which
Yes,
is just a testament to God did this. There's
Yes.
no other explanation.
exactly.
Well, that's could be why God made them confused and stuff. So the whole
Right, which is what Alyssa was saying too. Yeah, yes. The contrast: those who are in covenant with Him, those who are out of covenant. To those who are in covenant, He is this just shepherd, this kind, compassionate, loving, forgiving
Well, God
shepherd.
does everything completely. They all passed.
Yes.
So where when the children of Israel conquered Canaan, we're going to leave this group over here.
Right.
We're going to leave this people down here and really regret it later on. But God's
Yes.
like, no, didn't you see? I took care of the whole problem right here.
Yes, and to that point, when we just read in Psalm 106, when he says, it's not for your sake, but it's for his own name's sake. If he can't deliver them all, then it's his reputation on the line. His covenant is on the line. His ability to keep his covenant, that's what's on the line. That's what's at stake. And so, but when he delivers, It's very thorough. His judgment is thorough. His deliverance is thorough.
When we were going through, the beginning of this, didn't we say that there were possibly some Egyptians who believed and came through?
Yes.
So these left behind had been given the chance many
Right,
times.
exactly, which is
They
cool,
run out
yeah.
of time.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. When we read it in chapter 12, where they actually left, it said, and also a mixed multitude went with them. And so, yeah, that's in Exodus 12:38. So we saw the 600,000 men plus women and children, and a mixed multitude also. So yes, there was ample opportunity. I mean, it didn't mean their firstborn was spared, but it did mean that God is Lord and they realized it. Okay, verse 30. Thus the Lord, and again thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. So, yeah, as the sun is coming up, when those waters crashed, there were Egyptians dead on the seashore. And when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So, I mean, it won't last long. It's going to be really sad when we get to study all of this out, but for right now, it is a happy day. They're rejoicing. And in chapter 15, we're going to see this great celebration of their deliverance. See Joshua 2? This is the Rahab story, which is so fascinating. And again, I mean, I don't know if this is true. This is what I've heard. But like at the military academies, when they're learning military strategies, they can't even use Israel as an example for military strategies because it's so divine. Like there's nothing to learn. I mean, I would think fear God would be a great place to start, but there's nothing to learn. And the walls of Jericho made me think of it. Yeah. You know, when they send the trumpeters out first, they just march around, and then the wall. I mean, it's just so. I just want you to know, our victories, our deliverance, our salvation. We have nothing to do. We're so helpless in our own deliverance. So it's all God. Okay, so I love this story about Rahab. So, starting in verse 8. So Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 8. Now, before they lay down, wait, is this right? Before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God, in heaven above and on earth beneath. This is Rahab the prostitute that we talk about so often. And, so these spies go in to spy out the land of Jericho. It's just so fascinating because they don't bring back any information that's of any value to anyone, because God's going to tear down the walls after they march around it. They did not need to go into Jericho to get that battle plan. So they went. I think they went in just for Rahab, and she's in the lineage of Christ. But here she is. All that to say, 40 years later, because they're going to be in the wilderness 40 years. 40 years later, they're still fearing the Israelites, and they know what God did. And so, I mean, I love how she said it. The terror of you has fallen on us. We heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and then our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God, in heaven above and on earth beneath. So, I mean, that's the whole point of this whole thing, is to make himself known. Rahab got the memo. He made himself known, and just even 40 years later, they're still talking about this event. And Rahab is going to be spared, and she's in the lineage of Christ.
She wasn't even there, and she believed. Like, I thought that's pretty
I
amazing.
know.
She heard some of the Israelites who were right in the presence of God, like how they
I know.
wavered and then yet she wasn't even there, but she had heard and
Exactly, because faith comes
Faith
from
comes by
hearing,
hearing.
and believing. Yes, it. Again, it doesn't even it's not even logical to even say it like that. We think we have to, we'd be so faithful if we could see him at work. No, you wouldn't. You have to hear and believe, and that's where your faith comes from. Okay, we'll stop there today, and then we'll pick up next week. So, because we're going to cover 2 topics very thoroughly. The timing of this all, it's so fast. Oh my goodness, it's so good. And then we're going to talk about baptism in the New Testament, how this is used in the New Testament. Okay, do we have